Picture this. It is September of 1963. The Frankfurt Motor Show is buzzing with the usual parade of sensible saloons and cautious, inoffensive family cars. West Germany is booming. The economic miracle, the Wirtschaftswunder, has reshaped a nation in barely 15 years. Prosperity is visible on every autobahn, and the car industry is reflecting it in chrome, steel, and ambition. Then, on a stand tucked into one corner of the Messegeland exhibition hall, a small sports car company from Stuttgart pulls the covers off something that looks unlike anything anyone has seen before. Long hood, sloping tail, round headlights, and that extraordinary silhouette, a shape so clean and so confident that you'd swear it had been drawn in a single, unbroken line. The badge on the engine lid read 901. Within 12 months, it would be renamed. Within a decade, it would be legendary. And within 60 years, it would become one of the most recognizable, most passionately debated, most fiercely loved automobiles in automotive history. But here is the thing that most people, even people who know Porsches, don't fully appreciate. The car, you know as the Porsche 911, nearly didn't exist at all. It was born out of personal conviction, against institutional doubt, shaped by a young designer, under enormous pressure, powered by an engine that some within the company considered an unnecessary risk, and styled around a layout that many respected engineers believed could never be made safe for the road. Today, we are going to look at 13 facts about the original Porsche 911, the cars built between 1963 and 1973, that reveal just how close this icon came to being something entirely ordinary, or to not existing at all. Stay with us, because some of these will genuinely surprise you. Fact 1. The car was never supposed to be called the 911. Let's start at the very beginning, with a detail that trips up even knowledgeable enthusiasts. When Porsche unveiled the car at Frankfurt in 1963, it carried the internal designation 901, referring to the model's position in Porsche's numbering sequence. The car was shown, admired, and prepared for production under that name. Then Peugeot got involved. The French manufacturer had long held and vigorously enforced trademark rights in France over all three-digit car model numbers, where 0 appeared in the middle. 001 through 909, broadly speaking, were Peugeot territory. Rather than fight a legal battle in one of their most important export markets, Porsche simply changed the middle digit. The 901 became the 911. The change cost almost nothing. The name it produced became priceless. It is worth pausing on that for a moment. One of the most iconic model designations in automotive history. A number so recognizable it doesn't even need the Porsche name attached to be understood, came about because of a trademark dispute with a French company. Most Americans couldn't have picked out of a lineup. Fact 2. The body was designed by a 25-year-old. The man responsible for the 911's shape was Ferdinand Alexander Porsche, known universally as Butzi, the eldest son of Ferry, Porsche, and the grandson of the company's founder. When the design process began in earnest in the early 1960s, Butzi was in his mid-20s, working within the company's small styling department. The brief was demanding. The 911 had to be larger and more practical than the outgoing 356, more comfortable for longer journeys, capable of carrying genuine luggage, and convincing enough to attract buyers who might otherwise look at a Jaguar E-Type or an Alfa Romeo. But it also had to be unmistakably a Porsche. What Butzi produced is now so familiar that it takes a conscious effort to see it fresh, that long, tapering hood, the way the roofline flows almost seamlessly into the engine cover, the circular, slightly froggy headlights, the haunches over the rear wheels that hint at everything going on behind the driver's back. It is a design with no unnecessary line and no wasted surface. It was striking in 1963, and it remains striking today, which is about as difficult a thing to achieve in industrial design as anything you can name. Fact 3. The engine was considered a dangerous gamble. To power the new car, Porsche developed a completely new engine, a 2.0-liter air-cooled flat-six. mounted behind the rear axle. The engineer primarily responsible for its development was Hans Tomala, working closely with a young Ferdinand Piëch, who would later become one of the most powerful figures in the entire global automotive industry. The choice of a flat 6 rather than the flat 4 used in the 356 was not universally welcomed inside the company. A 6-cylinder air-cooled engine with a displacement of just under 2 liters, producing 130 horsepower in standard trim, was technically ambitious by the standards of the early 1960s. Air-cooled engines of that complexity had a history of being difficult to keep cool consistently, difficult to tune for refinement, and prone to exciting failures if the owner was less than attentive. What made this particular engine remarkable was the use of a chain-driven overhead camshaft on each bank, 2 camshafts in total, at a time when many comparable performance engines still used pushrods. The result was an engine that revved willingly, breathed well at high speed, and produced a sound that distinctive, slightly flat, mechanical howl that became as much a part of the 911's identity as its shape. Fact 4. The handling problem was real, and the company knew it. Here is where we need to be honest with each other, because this is a point that was occasionally glossed over in period road tests and early promotional material. The rear engine layout with the engine hanging behind the rear axle rather than ahead of it or above it created a significant handling challenge. Under hard braking mid-corner, or when power was lifted abruptly in a bend, the heavy rear end could swing wide with alarming speed. This was not a rumor or the exaggeration of cautious journalists. It was a characteristic that experienced drivers had to learn to manage, and that caught unprepared drivers badly. What is perhaps less well known is that within Porsche's own engineering department, serious voices raised concerns about the layout during development. The argument was not that the car was undrivable, it was not, but that the physics of the rear engine configuration imposed a handling compromise that could not be fully engineered away. The company's response, over the decade from 1963 to 1973, was a series of progressive engineering solutions. Ballast was added to the front, the spare wheel was repositioned, front bumper weight was added, and crucially, in 1969, the wheelbase was extended by 57 millimeters. That change, which moved the rear wheels further back relative to the engine, transformed the car's behavior at the limit. The 911 that emerged from 1969 onwards was measurably more manageable than the cars built in the first 5 years of production. Fact 5. The original price put it in serious company. When the 911 arrived in the United States in 1965, the base list price was approximately $6,490. That placed it directly alongside some genuinely formidable competition. A Jaguar E-Type Roadster cost around $5,300 at the same time. A Corvette Stingray could be had for roughly $4,100 in base form. The Porsche was, in other words, a premium product, even among sports cars. It asked buyers to pay considerably more than a Corvette, and somewhat more than a Jaguar, for a car that produced less outright power than either, and looked unusual by American standards. The fact that it found buyers and established a loyal following remarkably quickly says something important about what Porsche had created. The 911 offered a quality of engineering, a precision of response, and a long-distance capability that neither the Jaguar nor the Corvette could quite match. The people who bought it knew what they were paying for. Fact 6. The Targa was born out of American safety politics. In 1965, Porsche showed a new body variant at the Frankfurt Motor Show, the 911 Targa. The name came directly from the Targa Florio, the epic Sicilian road race that Porsche had entered with distinction since the 1950s and would continue to dominate into the 70s. But the design of the Targa, that distinctive brushed stainless steel roll hoop, the removable roof section, the folding rear window, was not purely a styling exercise. It was a direct response to rumors circulating in the mid-1960s that the United States government was about to ban open convertibles outright on safety grounds. Porsche's solution was to create what the company called a safety cabriolet, a car that provided open-air motoring while retaining a substantial structural member above the occupants. The rumored ban never materialized, but the Targa went into production regardless, found enthusiastic buyers, and became one of the defining design statements of the late 1960s. That stainless roll bar, polished and permanent, is one of the most recognizable single components in sports car history. Fact 7. The 911S and the wheels that changed everything. In 1966, Porsche introduced the 911S, the high-performance variant of the range. The engine in the S produced 160 horsepower, an increase of 30 over the standard car, achieved through higher compression, revised valve timing, and Weber carburetors in place of the standard Zenith units. But what people remember about the early 911S is not primarily the engine, it is the wheels. To cope with the S's performance while simultaneously saving weight, Porsche commissioned a new alloy wheel design, a 5-spoke forged aluminium rim that became known almost immediately as the Fuchs wheel. After the company that manufactured it, the weight saving over the standard steel rim was significant. The visual effect was even more significant. Those open, petal-shaped spokes gave the 911S an appearance of purposeful lightness that the standard car simply did not have. Fuchs alloy wheels are, today, among the most recognizable and most imitated wheel designs in automotive history. Original, correctly dated examples are actively collected. The wheel that began as an engineering solution became an icon. Fact 8. Only 23 examples of the 911R were built. In 1967, Porsche built what was, in effect, an experiment, a 911 stripped to the absolute minimum in the pursuit of motorsport performance. The car was called the 911R, and the production total was 23 units. The body panels were fiberglass rather than steel. Interior trim was reduced to almost nothing. The engine, in its most aggressive state of tune, produced around 210 horsepower from a 2-liter displacement, at a time when that output was considered extraordinary from a naturally aspirated road-derived unit. Total weight came down to approximately 800 kilograms, compared to over 1,000 kilograms for the standard road car. The 911R was never offered for sale to the general public. Most examples went to private racing teams and to Porsche's own factory competition program. The cars competed in long-distance events and marathon rallies, and proved conclusively that the 911's basic structure was fundamentally sound for serious motorsport use. Today, a genuine 911R from 1967 is among the rarest and most valuable Porsches in existence. Values at major international auctions have exceeded $1 million for documented examples, a reflection of how completely the automotive world has come to understand what those 23 cars represented. Fact 9. The 1969 wheelbase change was the turning point. We touched on this earlier, but it deserves its own moment because it is one of the most consequential single engineering changes in the car's history. For the 1969 model year, what Porsche internally called the B Series, the 911's wheelbase, was extended by 57 millimeters. This was achieved by moving the rear wheel mounting point backward, which in practical terms moved the rear axle further away from the engine's center of gravity. The change did exactly what the engineers intended. It reduced the pendulum effect of the overhanging engine mass in cornering situations. It made the car more predictable at the limit. It reduced, though did not eliminate, the sudden, snapping oversteer that had caught out too many drivers in the first 5 years of production. Road and Track magazine, which had been testing 911 since the car's American introduction, noted the improvement explicitly in their 1969 test. The car they drove was measurably easier to place and more forgiving in recovery than the 1967 car they had tested 2 years earlier. For the experienced Porsche driver, the B Series 911 represented a significant step forward in confidence and consistency. Fact 10. The external oil filler was a famous mistake. For the 1972 model year, Porsche made a change that seemed logical at the time and became notorious almost immediately. Concerned that petrol station attendants in the United States and elsewhere might accidentally fill the engine oil tank with fuel, the two filler caps were awkwardly close to one another. In the previous arrangement, Porsche relocated the oil filler to an external flap on the right rear wing. The idea was sound in theory. In practice, it had an unintended consequence. Garage attendants who spotted the external flap, assuming it to be a fuel filler, occasionally poured petrol directly into the engine oil tank. The result, predictably, was catastrophic engine damage. Porsche quietly reversed the change for the following model year. The brief relocation of the oil filler remains one of the more human and rather endearing errors in the 911's development history, a reminder that even the most carefully considered engineering decisions can produce unintended consequences in the real world. Fact 11. The engine grew from 2 liters to 2.4. Over the first decade of production, the 911's engine grew steadily in displacement. The original 2.0-liter unit gave way to a 2.2-liter engine for the 1970 model year, and then to a 2.4-liter unit for 1972. Each step brought meaningful improvements in low-end torque and real-world usability without fundamentally altering the engine's character. The 2.4-liter 911S, producing 190 horsepower in European specification, was regarded by many period road testers as the best balanced of all the early 911s, fast enough to be genuinely exciting, but with the refinement and tractability that the earliest cars had sometimes lacked. The progression from 2 liters to 2.4 liters in just 8 years also demonstrated something important about the basic engine design. There was room in the architecture to grow. The fundamental engineering was sound enough to absorb increasing displacement and increasing power without requiring a fundamental redesign. That flexibility, built in by Tomala and PH in the early 1960s, is part of the reason the flat-six engine continued evolving for decades. Fact 12. The Carrera RS 2.7 was never supposed to be so popular. For the 1973 model year, Porsche introduced what many regard as the definitive expression of the first-generation 911, the Carrera RS 2.7. To homologate the car for Group 4 GT racing, Porsche needed to build a minimum of 500 road-going examples. The company was not entirely certain the market would absorb even that number. The RS 2.7 featured a 2.7-liter engine producing 210 horsepower in standard tune, a lightweight body with prominent ducktail rear spoiler, thinner glass, and a stripped interior in the sport specification. The touring version offered more creature comforts at a modest weight penalty. Porsche's caution about public demand was completely, spectacularly misplaced. Orders came in far faster than anticipated. Rather than building 500 examples and stopping, Porsche ultimately produced 1,580 Carrera RS 2.7s, more than 3 times the original target. The original German market price for the sport specification was 33,000 Deutsche Marks, roughly $8,300 at the exchange rate of the time. Today, a correctly documented, matching numbers, Carrera RS 2.7 inches, good condition, will sell at auction for figures that would have seemed like fantasy in 1973. Auction results in recent years have seen examples change hands for well over $1 million, with exceptional cars exceeding that figure considerably. Fact 13. The racing record silenced every critic. Through all of this, through the handling debates, the engine questions, the rear weight discussions, the 911 was quietly compiling one of the most extraordinary competition records of any road-derived sports car in history. By the end of the first decade of production, Porsches, based on the 911, had won outright at Monte Carlo, had dominated their class, and repeatedly threatened for overall honors at the Targa Florio, had competed at Le Mans, had won international rally championships, and had proven, on circuits and stages across 3 continents, that the layout everyone said was impossible produced a car that was, in the right hands, very nearly unbeatable. The 1970 Monte Carlo Rally victory, with Björn Valdegård at the wheel, came on roads that should have favored front-engine, rear-wheel drive machinery from the major manufacturers. The 1973 Targa Florio, won by a 911 Carrera RSR, was the last major international road race run on open public roads in Europe, and Porsche won it in a car directly derived from the road vehicle you could walk into a showroom and buy. The engineers who said it was impossible were wrong, not because the physics were different from what they predicted, but because the people at Zuffenhausen found ways, one careful engineering step at a time, to turn those physics into an advantage. So there you have it. 13 facts about one of the most consequential automobiles ever built. A car that arrived with the wrong name, was designed by a young man under pressure, powered by an engine some considered a risk, criticized for a layout that experts said couldn't work, and went on to become the standard by which all other sports cars are measured. If you drove one of these cars, if you remember what it felt like to sit in that slightly awkward, slightly cramped, completely addictive cockpit and win that flat 6 up toward the red line, then you understand something that no amount of numbers or historical context can fully convey. These were machines with character. Real, specific, occasionally inconvenient character, and that character is precisely why they endured when dozens of more technically conventional sports cars from the same era are now forgotten. We would genuinely love to hear from you in the comments. Did you own a first-generation 911? Did you work on one? Is there a fact here that surprises you, or one you would have added? This audience knows these cars better than any reference book, and your experiences are worth hearing. If you found this video worthwhile, please consider subscribing to the channel. It makes an enormous practical difference to whether we can keep making content at this level. And if you know someone who shares a passion for this era of motoring, pass it along. These stories deserve to be kept alive. Thank you, sincerely, for spending this time with us. It means more than you know.